The Lawrence Brothers compound, also known as the Dogpound, is coming to MX vs ATV Legends this week, and we have a first look exclusive peek to give you guys a chance to look at what this track is going to look like in the game. This is awesome. This is, of course, Jet and Hunter Lawrence's compound, also known as the Dogpound nowadays. This used to be Chad Reed's facility for a very long time, and then was kind of in between owners a little bit, and then eventually became 83 compound, and then eventually became the Dogpound. So let's play this track, talk about what it looks like in game, and kind of show this off so you guys can see it for yourself. All right, so we're going to start off by playing the Sand Supercross track right here. And of course, these are, I would assume, as close to the current replica tracks as they can as possible. I would assume that this is not the layouts of the tracks that they actually have on the compounds like this exact second, because these the brothers are obviously getting ready for the 2025 Monster Energy Supercross season, and they usually tend to change the layouts up a little bit. So this is probably what the tracks looked like earlier this year at some point when they were able to go in and scan it, and it looks like they were 3D scanning it based on all the terrain that they have, the terrain information. It looks pretty 3D scanned to me, but I could be wrong there. Either way, very, very cool that we finally have something like this in the game. You know, we've had a couple compounds over the years. We've had the Stu compound and stuff like that. I'm trying to remember if we've had like a straight up Chad Reed compound before in a game. I don't think we ever did get Chad's compound in a console game, at least. Of course, these all tend to exist in MX Bikes and MX Sim. But for Legends and stuff like that, we've really only had kind of just like the Stu compound as like one of those main big compounds that people can play on. So yeah, this was owned by Chad Reed from about 2003, 2004, I think is maybe when he bought it, up until really close to the end of his career. Really when he went to JGR, I think is when he ended up selling it. He moved to North Carolina for JGR. That was in 2019, of course. And it was owned by the Lane family, or McKenzie family, depending on what name they're going by this week, which was Ethan Lane, an amateur kid that raced for Rocky Mountain ATV MC at one point and was out of the UK. Family comes from a lot of money, so they bought the property and owned it for not very long, like maybe 2 years or so. And then when the Lawrence brothers really started hitting their stride, they purchased this property and made it the Dogpound. And a lot of guys train here. It's not just the Lawrence brothers that train here. It does kind of tend to depend on who the Lawrence brothers want to have there. But as I believe the model still exists that guys can just straight up like pay to have their way onto the compound and test and ride here. I have been to this facility once in my life, and it was when it was right at the tail end of being the 83 compound. And the Lawrences were sometimes out there, but not really. And I went out there when KTM was still not fully ready to debut their new bike yet, and Cooper Webb was out here training. And it was a very big hush-hush thing, like shut up and don't talk about it kind of situation. So didn't really get to like show off that I was there, but been there before. This looks extremely accurate to everything I remember, and we'll kind of go through the compound a little bit and show off the different areas here in a minute. Just wanted to at least show off this track a little bit, the different you know, options of the rhythm lanes and stuff like that. I just think they're very, very well built. Like the entire tracks all across the facility are very accurate, in my opinion, to what a Supercross track should feel like, how it rides, how technical it is, and so on and so forth. So it's also cool in that regard that they, I feel like, put a lot of time and effort into making that work really well. So that's the Sand Supercross track. Let's head over and do the Clay Supercross track. We might do a cheeky little transfer. Didn't quite get it all the way, but a little wall jump right here. Whoop section here, circle back and do another whoop section. And of course there are single races and time trial modes on all of these tracks. So these tracks will have hay bales on them, like when you do those time modes or those you know, races and stuff like that. So it kind of maybe looks a little bit bare right now when you're just playing it on freeride, but obviously that's what it looks like in real life as well, because they don't put like tough blocks down all across the track in the middle of testing and stuff. So but they do for your ability to play this in single player or online. But anyway, this is the Clay Supercross track, and for those that have like no idea about how the world of Supercross testing and all that stuff works, most compounds tend to go with this model, especially the Florida ones, of using kind of the base soil that's available at the Florida compounds, and then another track in which they bring in a ton of dirt and make a what is usually called a clay supercross track. And that's why it looks so much different than the soil all around it. It is imported dirt, and to be honest, probably the sand track on here was also imported dirt from somewhere else. The moto track is more than likely just dirt that was found on the facility. A couple things were probably also brought in, but we'll get to that when it's time. Either way, the point is that they're trying to kind of replicate a few different, track options. It's very tough in Florida to replicate what the California tracks will feel like. Denver, Salt Lake City as well falls under that scale, where it's like hard packed and very blue groove. It's a clay base, but it's way harder. So sometimes they'll bring in this clay and add a lot of stuff like lime or drying agent to it to try to mimic it. But for the most part, these tracks tend to be very different in how they're built, very different in how they ride. And again, it's just for them testing purposes, trying to mimic different conditions and feel something different on the bike kind of every day so that they can work on stuff and it's not just riding the exact same track over and over again. So this compound, really as long as Chad has owned it, has had, and then eventually the Lawrence Brothers obviously has had these two tracks on it. I think they tend to reuse the dirt, sometimes bring in a little bit of new dirt, but for the most part try to not mix and match too much. And yeah, again, different layouts used all the time. Actually, I didn't even think to look if any of these layouts are replicas of anything. I don't think they are, but oftentimes test tracks on facilities will be built to replicate something from either the 2025 season coming up or something that they did a lot of work on rolling into last season, for example. So yeah, not too sure. Can also 5 this guy right here, and I think if I get this right, you can 4 into the corner. Yeah, there you go. There's the big boy line. And step on, step off, still pretty simple right here. I like these tracks, honestly. I feel like these tracks, the scaling of them, how they ride, how they flow, is as close to like an authentic Supercross experience as I've probably had in a console game ever, which is kind of nice because you just don't often get that feeling. I feel like I have to go to Bikes or Sim to get that feeling. So to be able to play this track and really just kind of flow my lines together and do some really cool stuff in the game is pretty neat. So I'm excited to see that these are in game. Definitely excited to see that we get a little bit more compound action, and it's also cool that we get a current athletes compound that we can do a little bit of stuff on. So that's the clay Supercross track. Next up, before we hit the moto track, we're going to head over here. This is the sand track, and this is basically a single track of nothing but sand whoops. This track has been here quite a while, as far as I can remember as well. And, it's pretty simple. Outdoor testing, when these guys do outdoors at least, usually tends to revolve around a certain type of soil for a track. Obviously, loamy stuff. But there is Southwick, and there are a few sandier base tracks, Millville, and stuff like that fall on the schedule. And this gives the guys an option to test in deep sand, Florida sand, on what their suspension will do and feel like on some of these tracks as well. So I feel like people that will end up trying to play this track will be like, this is boring, there's no jumps, or there's nothing really fun about a little single track with nothing but turns. But the point is really just about testing sand settings, softer settings to get the bike dialed in with stuff like that. And I do still think that this is kind of fun and a fun challenge to do a little bit of stuff on, just because it's really a test of how fast you can go and still hit these bumps pretty effectively, because it is a little bit tricky to stay on the track because it's such a tight little single track, but it's also tricky to get on top of the bumps and hit everything smoothly. So that's kind of cool as well. But yeah, just do one lap on this track. I don't need to go too deep dive into it. Pretty much self-explanatory. It's a sand track, good for testing, good for honestly working on some corner technique as well, and also just good for kind of working on being a little bit of a sender. So that is one lap there. Found our tracks again. So let's loop back over this way to kind of the real crux of the compound. And again, if you've seen the Chad Reed videos over the years, you've probably seen him doing some riding on this track right here. This is the outdoor track. It actually, as weird as this may sound, hasn't changed a whole lot over the years. Chad dug up a massive lake on the other side of the compound. It's kind of like over there-ish. and used a lot of that soil to create a lot of options on this compound, but also dug out a couple areas within the middle of the track as well to build some jumps and stuff like that. For the most part, the base of the track is the Florida sandy soil, and geographically, this is in Dade City, Florida, which is more on the Gulf of Mexico side of Florida near Tampa. Most of the training facilities are kind of more middle and or more East Florida, closer to Orlando. So that's not really a coastal city necessarily, but it is more on the east side of Florida. And honestly, this compound and like the Baker's facility, Baggett's old facility, I'm trying to think what else is down there, Sandbox, a lot of those tracks are all very close together, surprisingly so. But Chad Reed and then now the Lawrence Brothers Dogpound compound that we're playing here has always kind of been its own little thing, kind of hidden off on the other side, more on the Tampa side, like I said. Tim Ferry, who was Chad Reed's teammate for a long time, used to have a facility over on this side as well near his house. And then Dade City MX is actually not too far from this place either. But again, a little bit of like a, kind of just hidden. Nobody really knows it's still here. And Chad has had some issues in the past with like dealing with neighbors not being thrilled with him riding, because there's a lot of houses like pretty much right in front of me going that way, tucked behind those trees. And he didn't really have too much of a problem until he built that thing that's in front of me. As we go through this corner, you'll see there is now a massive like kart track, go-karting track on the right side right there. And when Chad started using that, it started getting into a little bit of legal trouble apparently with times that he was using it, how loud it was and stuff like that. Anyway, I digress. I don't think the Lawrence brothers do too much karting. I think they're out here just grinding. But the Natty track is, interesting to say the least. Again, it's not like the most extravagant, fun, big track there is out there, but it's very fast. And what you'll notice when you play it as well is it drags the bike down a lot. It's very sandy, much sandier than you would expect, but Florida kind of does that a little bit. It throws a little bit more of like the much sandier than you expect aspect into it. So kind of cool because it feels really realistic in that regard, where like you're going a fairly natural speed on the bike. You're not going too fast, which this game can tend to do sometimes with that. Like you can really get cooking, but I feel like this track actually slows that pace down a little bit, gives you a little bit more fun and flow options of getting in and out of corners. And then the jumps themselves are pretty fun, but also like look at how gnarly the braking bumps are. A lot of ruts in and out of the corners, so I'm sure like if you played this online with your buddies, you could really develop some really cool racing lines and stuff like that. And yeah, so very, very cool track, and cool that you get a chance to grind through it a little bit. Like I said, it hasn't changed too much over the years. If you've watched like some famous Chad Reed videos over the years, and I keep referencing Chad Reed because he owned the compound for a majority of the time. It's more recently been become the Lawrence Brothers Dogpound. But Chad Reed has had so many videos, Verb Platinums, Racer X films that have gone, super, super popular with YouTube's algorithm. And a lot of the jumps that you'll see here are kind of just the same jumps reworked. Like, for example, that like big thing in the middle that's right here was there 15, 20 years ago or so when he was doing videos on this track. It just has been, reiterated and used in a few different forms. Like I think you can even tell as you go over this hill right here, it used to kind of go straight on right there, and there's like a part of the track that used to exist, but now they've like turned it around and made it a little bit of like a floater coming out of this corner, for example. And this back straightaway used to just go down the back straightaway to go behind me right there instead of going over the hill this way and having some turns and stuff like that. So it's kind of been all over the place a little bit, but yeah, again, Chad has definitely got his laps put in on this facility. So the last little part of this video, I'm just going to kind of free ride around the map a little bit and show off a couple things that I remember from being there and that I know are on the facility for a fact. So that's a couple laps of the Natty track. Let's go over and just kind of rip a lap or so here on what is the go-kart track. So they have an oval. I keep saying he because to me it's just the Chad Reed compound, but the Lawrence brothers have this oval on the go-kart track. And then if you want to go a little bit faster, more of like a real karting experience, you can branch off and do the karting track, which is this pretty long track. And Chad and his kids would race shifter karts on this track. And I don't think I've ever seen the Lawrence brothers actually do anything on this track, but I guess I'd have to imagine that they probably own a shifter cart or two and do some fun stuff on here. Or maybe the city just told them, nah, new ownership, we're not going to grant you the license to mess around on this thing. But Chad put a lot of money into laying this thing down. Either way, pretty cool. I think this would be really fun to ride on UTVs online with your buddies, or just try to hot lap it a little bit and stuff like that, because it's kind of like a little bit more of that karting experience. But there's a lap of it there. There's one of the Lawrence Brothers VIP trailers that if you go to a Supercross last year or now this year moving forward, the Lawrence Brothers have their own VIP. So funny story about the Cooper Webb and the new KTM thing. When I walked into the facility that day, his bike was sitting right about here, and I walked around the corner to the left here, and Webb was standing right next to his bike, and when I walked up, he was like, why is this guy here? I could definitely see it in his face. I was there to interview Justin Bogle, who was there testing as well, but I know that they were keeping the KTM very tight-lipped at the time, so just a little funny anecdote there. But this shop right here is kind of the main workshop. That garage bay right there, like none of this you can actually see inside, obviously. They didn't model anything inside, but that garage bay right there opens up to like this really nice white tile floor, and there's like maybe 15 workstations in there, and a lot of different guys ride here, like I said, so a lot of guys pit out of there. There's also like a loft and a couple like cool little hangout areas in there, plumbing, electricity, obviously, all that stuff in there. I'd have to imagine that canopy right there is where they park most of their motorhomes and stuff that they have that they take to the races on a regular basis. This over here is more of like a little smaller shop. When I came here, this is where a lot of like privateer guys were testing at. I remember Jack Chambers at the time testing Supercross, and he was kind of parked out over here. So I think in here is a little bit more of just like some, you know, parts and components and tools and stuff like that. The main shop, like I said, is back over that away, but yeah, this is also just a little extension to that. Here's a couple of those Lawrence container boxes. If you go to a Supercross race, you'll see these two things usually parked side by side, and they have a little like VIP area in there. Over here actually is a tiny little house, and this is not actually a house that has ever really been lived in. I think it's just like here now is something that the guys can use. I'll talk about why no one's lived in it in a second, but they also have this cool little like free ride area over here. I haven't done too much, but you know, just some little free ride hits and stuff like that. That's kind of fun to mess around on. I think there's maybe like 10 or so jumps over here that you can hit. And then on the back side of this, over this way, you can see there's another jump in the trees right there. Looks like we can jump a ramp from there going that way in the trees. That's kind of cool. And a big launch over the hill right here. Okay, so I don't know how far this is going to let me go, but this is the main road into the facility, which is why this place is so damn hidden. Here's the lake that I mentioned that I think they kind of dredged out a little bit to get more dirt and stuff like that, but it does actually go through this whole neighborhood pretty far. And then the main entrance gate is way back over here, and even this going that way, that dirt road that's out that way, you are kind of in the middle of nowhere, like maybe about 10 minutes away from like the nearest grocery store kind of thing. And then obviously the facility is tucked way back in here. So all this, I remember driving in and going past all these areas. This is extremely anatomically correct. The tracks are all kind of hidden up on, you know, behind the hills over this way. And then most of it's kind of tucked up against the trees, obviously for noise reduction purposes as well. So that's kind of cool. So talking about the house that is on the facility that, like I said, I don't think many people have ever lived in. So Chad bought this facility, like I said, in 2004, and it used to have a house in these trees over here. I don't think they built or modeled anything in these trees. And in fact, yeah, it looks like there's just a small lake. But there used to be a house here. If I remember the story correctly, Chad lived in it for a very short amount of time, maybe less than a year, and then moved into a community in Tampa, which, like, these guys are all millionaires, so they want to live in like a nice lavish place and then come here and ride. They don't necessarily want to live on the facility. I didn't even notice this little single track right here. This is kind of cool. We'll ride this while I talk about this. So the house that he had lived in here ran down and empty and just had nothing in it and stuff like that. So I don't remember seeing that other house that we talked about on the other side of the facility being there. But yeah, I wonder if maybe just like a couple people, you know, work out of there. I know that there's some people that help out at the Lawrence compound. Dan Truman is one of those guys that works for Get and Athena that is, you know, helping out with the Lawrence compound pretty frequently. I'm going to have to imagine maybe he has some spaces here that he can go relax and stuff like that. But I don't think anybody actually lives on the facility proper anymore, or has for quite a long time. So, but yeah, this is the Dogpound. Sorry for like the long-winded rant and ramble, but kind of the history lesson of it. The DLC pack that this is in also includes another track, which we will talk about tomorrow. But it's kind of a cool little bit of a throwback, but it is a throwback track. So I'm trying to differentiate when we get actually new, interesting, unique stuff like this in the game versus any throwback stuff. So the throwback stuff we'll talk about tomorrow, but this is the Lawrence compound coming to MXvs ATV Legends this week. I think it drops on the 17th, but don't yell at me if that doesn't end up being the case. I just know that that is what we've been told. So this is awesome. Appreciate you guys stopping by and watching. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns about this track, this facility, or if you want to just know any more information, because I have plenty of stories I can keep telling about this place, let me know in the comment section below. But thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys in the next one. So long for now.